Welcome back to Readings in Philippine History, everyone. I'm your professor, and today we're doing something really exciting. We're going to step into the shoes of a working historian to revisit an absolute turning point in global diplomacy. Corazon Aquino's 1986 address before the joint session of the United States Congress. Now, we aren't just going to recount this as some distant historical story. We're going to dive deep into this explainer and analyze her speech academically, treating it strictly as a primary historical source. We'll be dissecting the text, the subtext, and the context, so you can see exactly how historians use a speech like this to understand political ideas, nation building, and the highly calculated perspectives of historical figures. Here is a quick look at our agenda for today. We'll unpack what a primary source actually is, set the historical scene, and then spend the bulk of our time on a guided reading of the speech itself. After that, we'll analyze its broader significance and evaluate its strengths and limitations. All right, let's dive right into part one, unpacking a primary source.
So a primary source is literally the bedrock of historical research. It's any document or material produced right at the time of the event we're studying. As historians, we don't just passively memorize dates and facts from these documents, right? We interrogate them. We use external criticism to verify if a document is authentic and internal criticism to evaluate its truthfulness. And honestly, internal criticism is absolutely crucial because it requires us to analyze the context. Documents don't just fall out of the sky. They are the products of a specific time, a specific place, and specific people, who almost always have distinct political motives.
Which brings us perfectly to part two, the historical context. The mid-1980s in the Philippines was just a remarkably volatile period of rapid change, and we have to understand this to make sense of our primary source. Think back to August 1983. Former Senator Benigno Ninoy Aquino Jr., who was a massive opposition figure to Ferdinand Marcos's authoritarian regime, was assassinated right at the Manila International Airport. This tragedy plunged the Marcos regime into a massive, undeniable crisis of legitimacy. Fast forward to February 1986. Facing intense pressure, Marcos calls a snap election. Corazon Aquino, Ninoy's widow, runs against him. The vote canvassing is heavily rigged in Marcos's favor, which sparks total nationwide outrage. This culminates in the famous EDSA People Power Revolution, a peaceful, massive uprising that overthrows Marcos after 21 years in power and installs Cory Aquino as president. Just 7 months later, in September 1986, President Aquino is standing in Washington, D.C., addressing the U.S. Congress. Okay, part three. This is the core of our explainer, the guided reading of the speech. Let's start our textual interrogation. Now, normally when a head of state gives a diplomatic address to a foreign congress, they begin with standard, polite pleasantries. But Aquino? She completely shatters that expectation. She opens with shocking, vivid imagery. She talks about an airless cell, the sheer indignity of stripping a political prisoner naked, the psychological torture of a sudden midnight execution threat, and her husband's grueling 40-day fast. She does this intentionally to jolt the American lawmakers. By placing the intense human rights violations of the Marcos regime at the very forefront, she forces her audience to immediately confront the brutality her people had just escaped. And what's truly brilliant about this rhetorical choice is how she frames the narrative. By zeroing in on the microlens of her family's trauma, literally recounting the 3 agonizing times she and her children felt they had lost Ninoy, she seamlessly transforms herself into a living symbol. She becomes the face of the macro-level trauma of the entire Philippine nation under a dictatorship. She isn't just speaking as some newly installed politician, she's speaking as a grieving widow, appealing directly to the deep empathy of the U.S. Congress. She makes complex geopolitical realities feel deeply, deeply personal. As we move further into the text, Aquino shifts the focus. She moves from her husband's martyrdom over to her own political awakening and her total conviction in democracy. She explains to Congress that she participated in the 1984 elections and the 1986 snap election, fully knowing, without a doubt, that they would be rigged by the Marcos regime. So why do it? Because she argues it was the absolute only way to measure the opposition's power and prepare the public for a democratic transition. And despite all the systemic government thuggery, the people ultimately vindicated her. You see, Aquino had to prove to the international community that she wasn't just a revolutionary disruptor. She was a stabilizing force, deeply committed to nation building. Look at this clear roadmap she lays down for rebuilding a constitutional democracy. First, she highlights that the EDSA revolution was a limited, peaceful upheaval that completely respected human life. Then, she assures them that a fiercely independent commission was already drafting a new constitution to lock in the Bill of Rights, and she promises swift national and local elections. This was a massive, flashing signal to the U.S. that democratic institutions were actively, permanently being restored.
Then, she drops this masterful statistical contrast to completely dismantle the logic of authoritarianism. She points out that Marcos justified declaring martial law by claiming he needed to fight a communist insurgency of roughly 500 people. But using his hammer and tongs approach with zero respect for human rights, that insurgency actually ballooned to over 16,000 by the time he fled. I mean, talk about a devastating empirical critique. She uses this data to prove to American policymakers that suppressing freedom in the name of security doesn't actually work. It just breeds more radicalization.
Now, Aquino is walking a very delicate line here between reconciliation and strength. She advocates for peace, promising reintegration programs to heal a fractured nation. But remember, she intimately knows her audience. She carefully reassures the U.S. Congress that her desire for peace does not mean she's weak. Drawing a brilliant parallel to American history, she actually quotes Abraham Lincoln, emphatically stating that force may be necessary before mercy. She is firmly warning everyone that she will not waver, and she will do whatever it takes to defend her newly restored democracy against any threats.
Towards the end of the speech, we see a huge pivot. She moves away from the soaring themes of human rights and addresses a critical macroeconomic issue: diplomacy and debt. She uses an incredibly striking metaphor here, calling the country's massive foreign debt that other slavery. This is a crucial moment in our primary source. This is where the romantic rhetoric of freedom meets the cold, hard reality of national finance. Because the sheer scale of the debt she inherited was just staggering. We are talking about $26 billion. In her speech, Aquino reveals a devastating reality to the lawmakers. Half of the country's export earnings, which was about $2 billion, were going entirely just to pay the interest on a debt that the Filipino people never even benefited from. By bringing these exact numbers to the floor of Congress, she effectively shifts her appeal from emotional empathy over to the fiscal sensibilities of the Americans. She's showing them the exact economic chokehold that is threatening her new government. And this brings us to a really fascinating historical and diplomatic maneuver. Aquino boldly points out that the dictatorial government essentially stole this money. Yet, in the very same breath, she firmly commits her new government to honoring those debt obligations. Now, you might be wondering, why would a newly liberated people agree to pay the debts of their oppressor? Well, the underlying political agenda was survival. She needed to secure immense international and financial support from the United States, and committing to the debt was a highly calculated, pragmatic compromise to keep her restored democracy economically afloat.
Let's move on to Section 4, analyzing the content and its broader significance.
As historians, we always have to examine the persona of the speaker. Aquino was presented as the total visual and moral antithesis to the dictator. Marcos was known globally as a statesman. He was eloquent, charismatic, and had cunning political skills. Aquino's public image, which she cultivated incredibly well throughout this speech, was that of a mourning, widowed housewife thrust reluctantly into politics. However, as rigorous historians, we do have to point out a bit of historical irony here. Despite her image as an inexperienced everyday housewife, Cory Aquino actually hailed from the Quahongos, which was a deeply entrenched, wealthy, and powerful haciendar family in Tarlac. So what is the ultimate historical significance of this primary source? Well, first off, it absolutely worked. It successfully cemented the legitimacy of the newly formed EDSA government on the international stage, securing essential American backing. It also firmly established Aquino in the global mind as the democratic antidote to Marcos. But critically, from a neutral historian's perspective, the speech also reveals some hidden parallelisms. Even though she was Marcos's greatest opponent, her speech dictates that her administration's foreign policy, specifically maintaining deep strategic alliances with the U.S. and committing to a debt-driven economy, rather than repudiating the dictator's debt, remained essentially aligned with her predecessor's framework.
All right, Section 5, let's look at strengths, limitations, and point of view. Like we said earlier, historians never, ever take a primary source purely at face value. We have to evaluate it strictly as evidence. Looking at the strengths, this is an incredible, official, contemporary document. It gives us the direct perspective of the president immediately following a massive, historic revolution. It offers incredible insight into the ideology of democratic restoration, but we absolutely must acknowledge its limitations. It represents only one political perspective, and crucially, its primary purpose was highly persuasive,
She was there to win over the U.S. Congress for financial and political backing. Because of that specific intended audience, it strategically omits certain realities, like the legal arguments that might have allowed her to waive the stolen debt entirely, rather than placing that immense burden on the shoulders of the newly freed citizens.
Finally, Section 6, Thinking Like a Historian. To wrap up our explainer today, I want to leave you with the absolute foundational tools for your own historical inquiries. Whenever you read any primary source, in this course or out in the real world, you must ask yourself, who delivered this? Why was it delivered? To whom? And what was the underlying political agenda? Speeches are incredibly valuable windows into history, for sure, but they are also highly calculated, persuasive documents. Corazon Aquino's speech to Congress is undeniably a masterpiece of diplomacy and storytelling. But by interrogating it critically as historians, we uncover the much more complex economic and political realities of a nation in transition. So keep questioning your sources, and I will see you all in our next class.